In 8 days, Eric will have to execute the only person who ever made him feel like he mattered. She's a slave with no rights, no voice, no future. He's a bastard son who's been promised everything he's ever wanted: land, recognition, a place at the table. If he proves his loyalty by killing her, the axe is already sharpened. The countdown has begun, and every stolen moment they have left is a reminder that love in a Viking world built on power and blood doesn't stand a chance. But when Eric is forced to practice on another innocent girl first, to prepare himself for the execution that will finally make him legitimate, something inside him breaks. He makes a choice that destroys his future, enrages his half-brother, and seals both their fates. Now they have days, not weeks. And the only power left to them is deciding how their story ends, on someone else's terms or their own. 8 days became 7, 7 became 6, and on the cliffs overlooking a frozen fjord, with poison in there, hands and sunrise painting the sky gold, they'll face one final, impossible choice that will either destroy them or save them in ways they never imagined. The blade felt heavier than it should. Eric's calloused fingers traced the edge of the axe, testing sharpness he'd spent 8 years perfecting, and his stomach twisted with a nausea that had nothing to do with the stale mead from last night. In 8 days, he would use this weapon to execute the only person who'd ever looked at him like he mattered. The thought made his hands shake, and he gripped the handle tighter to stop the trembling. Astrid was kneading bread in the kitchen when Halvard's messenger found her. She didn't hear the words at first, just felt the way the other thralls suddenly went silent, the way their eyes dropped to the floor like stones into dark water. Her fingers kept working the dough, push and fold, even as her mind struggled to understand what the guard was saying. 8 days. Execution. Traitor's daughter. The dough stuck to her palms, and she realized her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't control them anymore. 3 hours earlier, before the sun had broken over the frozen fjord, Eric had been summoned to his half-brother's chamber. The longhouse still smelled of sleep and smoke, that particular heaviness that settles into wood and fur when bodies have been pressed together through a bitter coastal night. Halvard stood by the window, backlit by weak dawn light, his broad shoulders blocking most of the gray sky beyond. "You've served me well these past months," Halvard said without turning. His voice carried the casual certainty of someone who'd never questioned his right to speak. "Father's death left complications. The succession isn't as clean as it should be." Eric's jaw tightened. Complications. That's what Halvard called the violent power struggle that had split their family into armed camps, that had already cost 2 cousins their lives in midnight. Ambushes. "I'm offering you legitimacy." Halvard finally turned, and Eric saw something cruel swimming in his half-brother's pale eyes. "A place at my table. Land. Recognition of your name." Eric's heart lurched. Everything he'd ever wanted, spoken aloud like an incantation. But nothing came without price in this world, especially not from Halvard. The traitor Orm's rebellion took his life, but his poison remains. Halvard moved closer, close enough that Eric could smell the seal fat he used in his beard. "His daughter survives. A thrall in our own kitchen, trained by our own hands. The symbolism is unfortunate." Eric's blood went cold. He knew, somehow he knew, before Halvard said the name. Astrid. The room tilted. Eric focused on a knot in the wooden floor, counting the whorls in the grain to keep his face blank. 7 years of hiding every emotion, every thought, every flash of feeling that might give him away. He called on that training now. "You're asking me to execute her." His voice came out steady. Too steady. "I'm giving you the honor of proving your loyalty." Halvard's smile didn't reach his eyes. 8 days. Let the household witness your commitment. Let everyone see that you choose us over the bloodline of our enemies. Us. As if Eric had ever been part of that word. "And if I refuse?" Halvard laughed, a sound like breaking ice. "Then I'll know where your true sympathies lie, and so will everyone else." The threat hung unspoken but clear. Refusal meant exile at best, execution at worst. At minimum, it meant forever being the bastard son, forever on the outside. 8 days, Eric repeated. Prove yourself, brother. Halvard clapped him on the shoulder, the gesture almost affectionate. Then we'll talk about your future. Now, in the weak afternoon light, Eric sat alone in the weapon shed, holding the axe and trying to remember how to breathe. Astrid's face kept appearing in his mind. Not the way she'd looked this morning, kneading bread with flour, dusting her dark hair, but the way she'd looked 2 winters ago, the first time she'd smiled at him, really smiled, when he'd saved a portion of roasted pork from the Jarl's feast and brought it to her after everyone slept. She'd been surprised he even remembered she existed. Thralls were supposed to be invisible, especially to warriors training for recognition. But Eric had spent his whole life being invisible too, just in a different way. They'll notice if you keep stealing food for me. She'd whispered that night, but she'd eaten every bite, and her eyes had shone with something that looked almost like hope. Let them notice, he'd said, young and stupid and brave in the darkness. How many nights had they stolen since then? Whispered conversations in the shadows while the household snored, her hand finding his in the darkness behind the grain stores. The careful way she'd touched the scar on his forearm, the one from his first real battle, tracing it like it was something precious rather than proof of violence. Does it hurt? She'd asked. Not anymore. Liar. But she'd smiled when she said it. Eric's throat closed. He set down the axe and pressed his palms against his eyes until he saw lights dancing in the blackness. 8 days, 192 hours, 11,520 minutes. He'd counted them twice already. In the kitchen, Astrid forced herself to finish the bread. Her hands moved automatically, shaping the dough into rounds, placing them near the fire. The other thralls gave her space, that terrible kind of space people give the dying. Old Gerda, who'd been thrall here longer than Astrid had been alive, touched her shoulder once, briefly, then moved away without speaking. Astrid understood. Sympathy was dangerous. Association with the condemned could spread like sickness. She'd known her father was Orm. That wasn't the revelation that had knocked the breath from her lungs. She'd always known she was daughter. To the rebel Jarl who'd tried to challenge Bjorn's rule 12 years ago, who'd died badly and publicly, made example of to deter others from similar ambitions. What destroyed her was understanding that Eric knew, that Halvard knew, that her execution had been decided not despite Eric, but because of him. This was a test. She was the test. Their stolen moments, their whispered hopes, the careful way they'd built something fragile and precious in the gaps between duty and survival. It had all been seen, catalogued, and now weaponized. The bread blurred before her eyes. She blinked hard, refusing tears. If she had 8 days left, she wouldn't waste them crying. But her hands shook as she worked, and the dough kept sticking to her fingers no matter how much flour she used. 7 days remained, and Eric couldn't bring himself to look at her. He'd spent the entire morning in the training yard, beating a practice dummy with his sword until his shoulders screamed and sweat soaked through his tunic despite the freezing air. The other warriors gave him approving nods, mistaking his desperation for dedication. Halvard watched from the longhouse steps, arms crossed, that slight smile playing at his lips like he was enjoying a private joke. Astrid saw Eric from the kitchen entrance when she carried out scraps for the pigs. He had his back to her, but she recognized the rigid set of his shoulders, the particular way he held himself when trying not to feel anything. She'd learned to read these small signals over the years, the tiny cracks in his armor. Now those cracks felt like knife wounds. She dumped the scraps and stood there longer than necessary, cold wind cutting through her thin dress, watching him destroy the dummy with methodical violence. Part of her wanted him to turn around, to meet her eyes, to give her some sign that this was killing him too. Another part, the part that had learned survival as a thrall, hoped he'd stay facing away. Hope was more dangerous. Then despair. The afternoon brought unexpected visitors. A merchant ship from the east had docked despite the late season, carrying amber and furs and 3 thralls purchased from a failed settlement in the Roos lands. Halvard conducted the transaction in the Great Hall, and every thrall in the household was summoned to witness the new arrivals. a reminder of their own status and expendability. Astrid stood in the back with the other kitchen workers, hands clasped in front of her, eyes down. The new thralls looked half-starved, their faces hollow with that particular emptiness that comes from losing everything. 2 men, 1 woman. The woman couldn't have been more than 16, and she kept her gaze locked on the floor with the rigid stillness of someone trying to disappear. Strong backs, the merchant was saying, his Norse rough with an Eastern accent. The men worked iron before their Jarl fell. The girl weaves. Halvard circled the new acquisitions like a man evaluating livestock. We have enough weavers, but the men, yes, we'll take all 3. He gestured lazily toward his steward. Standard price, and something extra for making the journey this late. The transaction concluded with ritualistic efficiency. Coins changed hands. The merchant departed. The new thralls were led away to be assigned quarters and duties. And then Halvard's voice cut through the dispersing crowd. Wait, bring the girl back. Astrid's stomach dropped even though the words weren't meant for her. She watched the young thrall being pulled from the group, confusion and fear warring in her gray eyes. Halvard studied her with clinical interest. You weave, the merchant said. The girl nodded, silent. My half-brother Eric. Halvard gestured toward where Eric had entered the hall, still wearing his training sweat. Needs new instruction in the art of leadership, difficult decisions, life and death. His smile was a slash of cruelty. We find practical lessons more effective than philosophy. Eric's face had gone absolutely still. Astrid saw the moment he understood what was happening, saw the flash of horror he couldn't quite suppress. This thrall has value as a weaver, Halvard continued, his tone conversational. But she's also fresh property, unclaimed, without ties to our household. Eric, I want you to execute her. Tomorrow at dawn. Consider it practice. The hall fell into shocked silence. Even the hardened warriors looked uncomfortable. Executing enemy thralls after battle was one thing, but this was a girl barely off the merchant's ship, who'd done nothing, who'd had no chance to even learn their names. She's done nothing to warrant death, Eric said quietly, each word measured and careful. She's property. I need no warrant beyond ownership. Halvard's eyes glittered. You seem reluctant, brother. Perhaps you need this practice more than I thought. Or perhaps your loyalty needs more testing than I realized. The trap was elegant and obvious. Refuse this. Execution, and Halvard would know Eric wouldn't complete the real one in 7 days. Refuse, and everything Halvard had offered would evaporate. But agree, and Eric would kill an innocent girl tomorrow to prove he could kill the woman he loved a week later. Astrid watched Eric's face, saw the war happening behind his eyes. His jaw worked. His hands curled into fists at his sides. For one suspended moment, she thought he might refuse, might throw away everything and damn the consequences. Then he nodded. Once, sharp and final. Dawn tomorrow, he said, his voice like gravel. Halvard's smile widened. Excellent. I'm pleased you understand the necessity of this. He waved dismissively. Take her to the holding shed. Eric, you'll prepare your blade tonight. I want the household to witness. Make it clean. The girl was dragged away, her silence finally breaking into choked sobs. Astrid felt bile rise in her throat. This was because of her. Halvard was making Eric kill this stranger to break. Him, to season him, to make the execution in 7 days easier. She was watching her own death practiced on someone else's body. That night, Astrid couldn't sleep. She lay on her thin pallet in the thrall quarters, listening to the breathing of 20 other slaves crammed into the small room, and tried to understand how the world had become this. Somewhere in the compound, a 16-year-old girl was spending her last hours alive. Tomorrow at dawn, Eric would kill her. And 7 days after that, if nothing changed, he would do the same to Astrid. She rose silently, wrapped her cloak around her shoulders, and slipped outside. The moon was a thin crescent, giving barely enough light to navigate by. She didn't have a destination in mind, just needed to move, needed the cold air to shock some feeling back into her numb body. She found Eric in the weapon shed, Of course he was there. He sat on a low bench, his axe laid across his knees, a whetstone in his hand that he wasn't using. He just stared at the blade like it might offer answers. "You shouldn't be here," he said without looking up. His voice was wrecked. "Neither should you." Astrid stepped inside, pulling the door partially closed behind her. "You should be sleeping. Big day tomorrow. First execution and all." The bitterness in her voice made him flinch. Good. She wanted him to flinch. "Astrid." He finally looked at her, and the raw anguish in his face almost made her regret her cruelty. Almost. She's just a girl. Younger than me. She hasn't even been here a full day. Astrid's hands shook and she clutched her cloak tighter. "And you're going to kill her so you can prove you're capable of killing me." "I don't have a choice." "Everyone has a choice." The words came out sharper than she intended. "You're choosing recognition over her life. Over my life. Over whatever you thought we had." Erik stood abruptly, the axe clattering to the floor. "You think I want this? You think I'm not dying inside?" "I think." "Dying inside is easier than actually dying." Her voice cracked. "That girl will be dead tomorrow. I'll be dead in 7 days. But you'll still be breathing. You'll have your legitimacy and your land and your place at Halvard's table, and we'll just be names you try not to remember." The silence stretched between them, vast and unbridgeable. Then Erik's shoulders sagged, all the fight draining out of him. "I don't know how to save you." "Then don't kill her." Astrid moved closer, close enough to see the tears gathering in his eyes. "Tomorrow, don't do it. Refuse. Let that be your answer." "Halvard will—" "I know what Halvard will do. But at least that girl lives. At least she gets something more than one night of terror." Erik reached for her, but she stepped back. His hand dropped. 7 days, she whispered. "That's all we have left. Don't waste them becoming the kind of man who can do this." She turned toward the door. "If you kill her tomorrow, don't come looking for me again. I'd rather die alone than die knowing you practiced on someone else first." She left him there in the darkness, surrounded by weapons and impossible choices. Behind her, she heard a sound that might have been a sob, but she didn't turn back. 7 days. The count felt different now, more urgent, more final. Tomorrow would prove everything. Dawn broke gray and merciless over the fjord. Astrid hadn't slept. She'd spent the night sitting by the narrow window in the thrall quarters, watching stars fade. Into that colorless pre-dawn light, listening to her heart hammer against her ribs. Somewhere in the compound, that girl was breathing her last hours. Or maybe she'd already stopped breathing. Maybe terror had taken her during the night. The other thralls woke quietly, moving through their morning rituals with unusual silence. Everyone knew what was coming. Old Gerda touched Astrid's shoulder as she passed, a brief pressure that said everything words couldn't. "We see you. We know. We can do nothing." The execution was set for when the sun cleared the eastern peaks. Halvard wanted full light, wanted everyone to see clearly. This wasn't just about killing a thrall. This was theater, a message written in blood for anyone who might question his authority or Erik's commitment. Astrid forced herself to attend. She had to witness this, had to see whether Erik would go through with it, whether the man she'd loved in stolen moments was capable of becoming the man Halvard demanded. Her legs felt disconnected from her body as she walked across the frozen ground toward the clearing where the household was gathering. The girl was already there, kneeling in the center of a rough circle. Her hands were bound behind her back, her hair hanging forward to hide her face. She was shaking so violently Astrid could see it from 20 paces away. 2 guards flanked her, stone-faced and still. No one had bothered to learn her name. She would die anonymous. Warriors lined the circle, household. Thralls pressed behind them. This was mandatory viewing. Halvard stood at the front, positioned to see everything, his expression one of satisfied anticipation. The morning wind carried the salt smell of the fjord and something else, the metallic tang of fierce sweat. Erik emerged from the longhouse and Astrid's breath caught. He wore his leather armor, his hair pulled back, his face a carved mask that revealed nothing. He carried the axe she'd seen him holding last night, the blade catching weak. sunlight like captured ice. His steps were measured, deliberate. He looked like every other warrior who'd performed this duty 100 times before. But Astrid saw his hands, the way his knuckles were white around the axe handle, the almost imperceptible tremor in his right thumb. She saw, and her chest constricted with something between hope and despair. Erik stopped 3 paces from the kneeling girl. The crowd fell absolutely silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "Look at me," Erik said quietly. The girl's head jerked up. Her face was swollen from crying, snot and tears tracking through the dirt on her cheeks. Her eyes found Erik's, and Astrid saw the naked terror there, the animal understanding that death was seconds away. Erik's jaw clenched. A muscle jumped in his cheek. For 5 heartbeats, he just stood there, staring at this stranger whose life had become entangled with his through no fault of her own. Then he raised the axe. Astrid closed her eyes. She couldn't watch, couldn't bear to see the moment Erik became what Halvard needed him to be. Around her, the crowd leaned forward in anticipation. Someone coughed. A raven called from somewhere distant. Time stretched like heated metal, thin and unbearable. The axe came down. Astrid heard it hit, heard the thunk of blade meeting wood, and her eyes flew open in confusion. Erik had buried the axe in the ground between the girl's knees, so close the blade had torn her dress. The girl gasped, her whole body convulsing with shock. She wasn't dead. She was staring at the embedded axe like she couldn't comprehend what had just happened. "No." Erik's voice rang out clear and hard across the silent clearing. He turned to face Halvard, leaving the axe where it stood. "I won't do this." The collective intake of breath was almost loud enough to drown out his words. Halvard's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, rage, calculation, before settling into something cold and dangerous. "You refuse?" Halvard's voice was silk over stone. "You refuse a direct order?" "I refuse to murder an innocent girl to prove loyalty that shouldn't need proving." Erik's hands were empty now, open at his sides, vulnerable. "If this is what legitimacy costs, I don't want it." The crowd erupted in whispers. This was unprecedented. Bastard sons didn't refuse jarls, especially not publicly, especially not when offered everything they'd ever wanted. Warriors exchanged glances. The thralls pressed closer, hardly daring to breathe. Halvard stepped forward, his bulk casting shadow over Erik. "You understand what you're doing, what you're throwing away?" "I understand perfectly." Erik's voice never wavered. "I understand that if I kill her today, I'll kill Astrid in 7 days. And if I kill Astrid, I'll kill whoever you put in front of me the day after that. There won't be an end to it." He met his half-brother's eyes without flinching. "I won't be your executioner." "Then you're nothing." Halvard spat the words. "You're the bastard you've always been. You'll have no land, no recognition, no place in this hall." "I know. You'll be cast out, outlawed if I choose. You'll have nothing and no one." Erik's eyes found Astrid's across the crowd. The look that passed between them was brief but devastating in its intensity. "Not nothing," he said quietly. Halvard followed Erik's gaze, and understanding dawned on his face. His laugh was ugly. "Ah, so that's it. The thrall has softened you, made you weak." He gestured sharply to the guards. "Take him. Lock him in the storage shed until I decide what to do with his disobedience." 2 warriors grabbed Erik's arms. He didn't resist, just let them drag him away, his eyes still locked on Astrid, until the crowd swallowed him from view. The girl remained kneeling, forgotten in the chaos, still bound, still trembling, but alive. Halvard turned his attention to her with obvious irritation. "Someone take her to the far fields. She can work the frozen ground until her hands bleed. Maybe that will teach her the value of mercy she doesn't deserve." His gaze swept the assembled household. "Let this be a lesson. Sentiment is weakness. Loyalty is everything. Erik chose his path. Let him rot in it." The crowd began to disperse, buzzing with shocked conversation. Astrid stood rooted, her mind racing. Erik had refused. He'd thrown away everything. For that girl, for her, for some principle she hadn't been sure he still possessed. Old Gerda materialized at her elbow. 6 days now, she whispered. Whatever happens next, happens fast. Astrid nodded numbly. 6 days until her scheduled execution. But Erik was locked up now, and Halvard was furious, and everything had just become infinitely more complicated and dangerous. She should feel relieved that Erik had proven himself, that he'd chosen humanity over ambition. Instead, she felt terror, because now Halvard knew for certain that Erik would never comply. And men like Halvard didn't accept defiance. They crushed it. She watched the guards drag the nameless girl toward the fields, watched Halvard storm back into the longhouse, watched the household slowly return to routine as if something fundamental hadn't just shifted. And she realized with crystalline clarity that Erik's refusal, brave as it was, had only made things worse. Halvard wouldn't just kill her now. He'd make it hurt. He'd make sure Erik watched. He'd make the execution a punishment for both of them. A demonstration of what happened when people chose love over loyalty, when they valued sentiment over survival. 6 days. The countdown felt different now, not like time running out, but like time accelerating toward catastrophe. Astrid walked back toward the kitchen on legs that barely held her, past thralls who wouldn't meet her eyes anymore. She'd become something worse than condemned. She'd become the reason a warrior had fallen, the weakness that had destroyed a man's future. The other slaves would distance themselves even further now, terrified that her contagion would spread. In the weapon shed, Erik's axe still stood buried in the frozen ground where he'd driven it. Someone would pull it free eventually, sharpen it, put it back to proper use. But for now it remained, a monument to a choice that had saved one life and doomed others. 6 days. And Astrid had no idea if Erik's courage had bought them hope or simply guaranteed a more painful end. 5 days. The number carved itself into Astrid's consciousness like a blade scoring wood. She moved through her kitchen duties in a fog, hands performing familiar tasks while her mind spun uselessly, trying to find a way out of a trap that had no exit. Erik remained locked in the storage shed at the far edge of the compound, guarded day and night. She hadn't seen him since the execution that never happened, but she felt his presence like a weight against her chest, constant and suffocating. Halvard had gone quiet, which terrified her more than rage would have. He moved through the longhouse with deliberate calm, conducting business as usual, never mentioning Erik or the failed execution or the approaching deadline. But his eyes followed Astrid whenever she served meals in the great hall, tracking her movements with the focused attention of a hunter watching prey. He was planning something. The silence was just him sharpening his strategy. On the 3rd day after Erik's refusal, a trader arrived from the southern settlements. He brought news of early storms battering the coast, of 2 ships lost with all hands, of a jarl who'd been murdered by his own son over a woman. The household gathered to hear the stories, grateful for distraction from the tension that had settled over them like freezing fog. Astrid served mead and listened from the edges of the hall. The trader was a broad man with a scarred face and rings on every finger, the kind of man who'd survived by knowing when to talk and when to stay silent. He accepted his drink from Astrid without really seeing her, his attention fixed on Halvard. "I also bring message from Jarl Sigurd of the Eastern Fjords," the trader said, his voice carrying across the hall. "He heard of your father's passing, offers condolences and seeks to strengthen ties between your territories." Halvard leaned forward in his chair, interest sharpening his features. What manner of strengthening? His daughter. 15 winters, reportedly beautiful, trained in household management. The trader took a long pull of mead. "He suggests a marriage alliance, your position secured, his territory's protection guaranteed, beneficial for both." Astrid's hands tightened on the serving pitcher. Marriage alliances were common, practical, the way jarls built power and ensured loyalty, but the timing made her stomach turn. Halvard needed to demonstrate strength after Erik's public defiance. A marriage alliance would do that perfectly, would show the household that he was looking forward, Building empire, not troubled by a bastard brother's sentiment. Tell Sigurd I'm interested, Halvard said slowly. But I have matters to resolve here first. Internal matters that require attention. His eyes slid to where Astrid stood frozen by the wall. Once those are handled, we can discuss terms. Internal matters. He meant her. He meant Erik. He was going to execute them both and then immediately pivot to this marriage, turning their deaths into proof of his decisive leadership. The message was elegant. Halvard doesn't tolerate weakness or defiance, but he rewards loyalty and builds alliances. Dead lovers on one hand, political marriage on the other. Balance restored. That night, Astrid finally managed to bribe a guard. It cost her the only thing of value she owned, a small bronze pin that had belonged to her mother, smuggled through 12 years of slavery, kept hidden in the hem of her dress. The guard was young, barely 20 winters, and something in his face suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable with how things had unfolded. He took the pin without meeting her eyes and told her she had 1/4 of an hour at moonrise. The storage shed smelled of dried fish and old rope. Erik sat against the far wall, wrists chained to an iron ring embedded in the stone foundation. They'd given him water but little food. His face looked hollowed out, shadows pooling beneath his cheekbones, but his eyes were alert when she slipped through. The door. You shouldn't have come, he said immediately, his voice rough from disuse. Everyone keeps telling me where I shouldn't be. Astrid crossed the small space and knelt in front of him, careful not to touch, not yet. I had to see you. 5 days left. He said it like a fact, emotionless. Halvard's going to kill us both now. You understand that? I made it worse. You made it honest. She did touch him then, her fingers finding his face, tracing the sharp line of his jaw. You chose not to become the man he wanted. That matters. Erik's eyes closed at her touch, his whole body seeming to sag with relief or despair or both. It doesn't matter if we're both dead. Maybe dying honest is better than living as what we're not. The words sounded braver than she felt. Her heart was hammering so hard she could barely hear her own voice over the blood rushing in her ears. I wanted to give you more, Erik whispered. More than stolen moments and a refused execution. I wanted to give you a life. You gave me the only thing that mattered. You saw me. Her throat tightened. In 12 years as a thrall, you were the first person who looked at me and saw an actual person. Not property, not invisible labor. Me. Erik's chains rattled as he tried to reach for her, the sound sharp in the quiet shed. His fingers found hers, laced through them, held on like she was the only solid thing in a dissolving world. I love you, he said, and the words came out broken, like they'd been trapped too long and escaped damaged. I should have said it before. I love you, and I don't know how to save you, and it's killing me. Astrid's vision blurred. She'd imagined him saying those words 100 times in 100 different scenarios, but never like this. Never in a shed that smelled like death and endings. Never with chains between them and 5 days counting down to darkness. I love you too, she managed. I've loved you since you brought me that stolen pork and looked at me like I was worth the risk. They sat like that, foreheads pressed together, fingers interlocked, breathing the same air until the young guard's whistle warned her time was almost gone. 5 more minutes that felt like seconds. 5 days that felt like a lifetime, and no time at all. There has to be a way out, Erik said desperately as she started to pull away. A ship. We could steal a boat, run for the eastern settlements, disappear into... They'd hunt us down before we cleared the fjord. Astrid cut him off gently. Halvard needs to make an example now. He can't let us just vanish. His whole authority rests on punishing defiance. Then what? We just accept this? She looked at him, really looked, memorizing the exact shade of his eyes, the way his hair fell across his forehead, the scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident he'd told her about once. We have 5 days, she said quietly. Maybe we stop trying to escape and just live them. Really live them. However we can. 5 days isn't enough. No. Her voice cracked. But it's what we have. The guard whistled again, more urgently. Astrid stood, her legs unsteady, her whole body screaming at her to stay, to curl into Eric and refuse to leave, to make them drag her away. But that would only bring more punishment down on both of them. She moved toward the door, but Eric's voice stopped her. Astrid, the traitor's message. The marriage alliance. I heard. Halvard's going to execute us, and immediately announce his engagement. Turn our deaths into proof of his strength. Eric's chains rattled again as he shifted. He's thought this through, every angle. I know. She did know. She'd understood the moment the traitor spoke. Halvard was already writing the saga of this moment, crafting the narrative that would be told in halls for years to come. The Jarl who wouldn't tolerate betrayal, who punished sentiment, who built alliances while his enemies fell. They were becoming a cautionary tale in real time. 5 days. Eric repeated, and it sounded like a prayer or a curse or both. 5 days, Astrid echoed. Then she slipped through the door before she could change her mind, before she could beg the guard to lock her in there too, before she could give in to the howling desperation that wanted her to stop pretending there was any dignity in this, any choice, any hope. Outside, the moon hung low and swollen over the fjord, painting everything silver and black, beautiful and indifferent. The world would keep turning after they were gone. The tides would still rise and fall. The wind would still carry salt and ice. Their absence would matter to no one except themselves. 5 days. Astrid walked back toward the thrall quarters, counting her remaining hours like a miser counting coins. 120 hours, 7,200 minutes, 432,000 seconds. Not enough. Never enough. But all they had. 4 days remained when the girl came to find Astrid in the kitchen. The nameless thrall Eric had refused to kill, the one who should have been dead but somehow wasn't. She moved differently now than she had that first day off the merchant's ship, her spine straighter, her eyes harder. Terror had burned away whatever softness she'd carried and left something else in its place. She approached while Astrid was scrubbing cooking pots, the hot water turning her hands raw and red. The other kitchen thralls had learned to give Astrid distance, as if proximity to the condemned might somehow mark them too. But this girl walked right up, close enough that Astrid could see the purple circles under her eyes, the way her fingers were still bandaged from working frozen ground for 3 days straight. I need to speak with you, the girl said quietly. Her accent was thick, Eastern. Alone. Astrid glanced around the kitchen. Old Gerda was the only other person present, and she was half deaf anyway, bent over a gutted pig at the far table. We're alone enough. Speak. The girl leaned closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. My name is Sasa. I never told anyone because no one asked. But you should know the name of the person who owes you her life. Astrid's hand stilled in the wash water. You don't owe me anything. Eric made his choice. I had nothing to do with it. You had everything to do with it. Sasa's eyes were fierce despite the exhaustion in them. He refused because of you, because killing me meant he could kill you, and he couldn't live with that. She paused, working her jaw like the next words hurt to say. In the Rustlands, before my Jarl fell, I worked in the healing house. I learned things, plants, remedies, ways to ease pain or bring sleep. Astrid's pulse quickened. She pulled her hands from the water, wiping them on her apron, keeping her face carefully neutral. Why are you telling me this? Because there's a way out that no one's considered. Sasa glanced toward where Gerda worked, ensuring the old woman wasn't listening. A way where neither of you has to die the way Halvard wants, where you take the power back from him. What are you talking about? But Astrid's mind was already racing ahead, catching glimpses of what Sasa might mean, her stomach nodding with understanding and revulsion in equal measure. Hemlock grows near the stream past the western fields. I've seen it. Also nightshade, though that's harder to prepare properly. Sasa's words came. Faster now, urgent. Mixed correctly, either would bring sleep first. Deep sleep. Then the heart slows, stops. No pain, just peace. Astrid stepped back, her shoulders hitting the stone wall. You're suggesting poison, murder-suicide. I'm suggesting mercy. Sasa's voice cracked slightly. I've seen executions, Astrid. Halvard won't make yours quick. He'll make it hurt because Erik defied him. He'll want Erik to watch you suffer, to break him completely before killing him too. Her bandaged hands twisted together. But if you were already gone, peacefully, by your own choice, it would ruin his demonstration. He'd lose his power over both of you. The kitchen suddenly felt too hot, too close. Astrid's mind recoiled from the suggestion even as part of her recognized its terrible logic. That's not a way out. That's just a different kind of death. It's death on your terms instead of his. Sasa reached out like she might touch Astrid's arm, then thought better of it. I know it's not what you want, but in 3 more days when they drag you to the execution ground and you see what he's planned, you might wish you'd had this choice. Why? Astrid's voice came out strangled. Why would you help me with this? You barely know me. Because you're the reason I'm breathing. Sasa's eyes glittered with unshed tears. And because I know what it's like to be powerless while men decide your fate. This is the only power I can give you back. The power to choose your own ending. Astrid slid down the wall until she was sitting on the cold floor, her legs unable to hold her anymore. Poison. A quiet death instead of a public execution. The idea was horrifying and seductive in equal measure. She imagined Erik in his chains, imagined finding a way to bring him the hemlock too, imagined them drinking it together, falling asleep in each other's arms while Halvard's plans crumbled to dust around their cooling bodies. But that was still death, still loss, still the end of whatever future they might have clawed out of this nightmare if they just kept fighting, kept looking for escapes, kept refusing to accept the inevitable. I can't, Astrid whispered. I can't give up like that. It's not giving up. Sasa knelt beside her, close enough that Astrid could smell the earth and sweat on her. It's refusing to be his victim. There's honor in that, in choosing your own moment. There's no honor in any of this. Astrid pressed her palms against her eyes until she saw stars. We're thralls. We don't get honor. We just get used up and discarded. Then don't you want to deny him even that satisfaction? Don't you want to look him in the face and show him he never really had power over what mattered? The words burrowed under Astrid's skin into the angry, desperate place where hope and rage fought for dominance. Part of her wanted to scream at Sasa, to tell her to take her poison knowledge and disappear. But another part, the part that had survived 12 years of slavery by being brutally practical, understood the gift being offered. Control, agency, choice. I need to think, Astrid said finally, her voice hollow. 4 days. That's still time to think. Sasa nodded and stood. The hemlock is past the western fields, near where the stream bends east. Small white flowers, leaves like lace. I could gather it for you, prepare it. You wouldn't have to do anything except drink when you were ready. I said I need to think. 4 days becomes 3. Becomes 2, becomes none. Sasa's voice softened. I'll gather it anyway. Keep it hidden. If you change your mind, if you need it, I'll find a way to get it to you. Both doses. One for you, one for Erik, if you can reach him. She walked away before Astrid could respond, disappearing into the afternoon shadows like she'd never been there at all. Astrid sat on the cold kitchen floor, her mind fragmenting into 1,000 terrible possibilities. Death by execution or death by poison. Halvard's terms or her own. Public suffering or private peace. No good choices. Just degrees of awful. That night, sleep was impossible. Astrid lay on her pallet, staring at the darkness, imagining hemlock dissolving in water. She'd heard stories of poison deaths, the way the body shut down peacefully if the dose was right, brutally if it wasn't. She imagined drinking it with Erik, their fingers interlaced as consciousness faded, cheating Halvard out of his spectacle. The image had a terrible romance too. Star-crossed lovers choosing death together rather than separation. It was the kind of story skalds would tell in halls, the kind that made people weep into their mead. But living inside that story was different than hearing it sung. Living inside it meant accepting that 4 days was all they'd ever have, that there was no rescue coming, no clever escape, no miracle. Around her, the other thralls breathed in sleep, oblivious to the war happening inside her head. Old Gerda's snoring rattled through the room. Someone whimpered in a dream. The ordinary sounds of survival continuing while Astrid contemplated poison. 3 days earlier, she'd told Erik they should stop trying to escape and just live their remaining time. But living 4 days and then drinking hemlock felt like surrender. It felt like Halvard winning anyway, just in a different way. He'd still have destroyed them. He'd still have proven that sentiment was weakness, that love made you vulnerable, that power would always triumph over connection. But watching Erik forced to execute her publicly, watching him break under that weight, then die himself knowing he'd been the weapon Halvard used against her, that felt worse than poison. That felt like a violation of everything they'd built in stolen moments and whispered words. Astrid rolled onto her side, pulling her thin blanket tighter against the cold. 4 days, 96 hours, 5,760 minutes. She could count them until her mind shattered. But the number would still shrink toward 0. By morning, she still hadn't decided anything except that she needed to see Erik again. Needed to tell him about Sasa's offer. Needed to see his face when she described this new terrible choice. Maybe he'd have clarity she lacked. Maybe he'd know which death was more bearable. Or maybe he'd be as lost as she was, drowning in the same impossible mathematics of suffering. The sun rose red over the fjord, painting the ice-rimmed stones the color of blood. Astrid watched it through the narrow window and wondered if she'd see it rise 4 more times, or if somewhere between now and then she'd drink hemlock and fall asleep and never wake to see another dawn. 4 days. The count felt different now, not just time running out, but a clock measuring the space between 2 kinds of ending, and she still had no idea which one would hurt less. 3 days. The number hung in the air like smoke, visible in every glance the household gave. Astrid, in the way conversation stopped when she entered rooms, in how even the dogs seemed to sense something terminal approaching. She moved through her duties with mechanical precision, her hands performing tasks while her mind circled endlessly around Sasa's offer. Hemlock, peace, control, death. Halvard had emerged from his strategic silence. He'd announced a feast for tomorrow night, a celebration of his upcoming marriage alliance with Jarl Sigurd's daughter. The entire household would attend. Thralls would serve. Warriors would drink. And hanging over everything would be the unspoken knowledge that in 2 days, Astrid would die, and Erik shortly after. Their executions the dark foundation upon which Halvard would build his new legitimacy. The young guard who'd let Astrid visit Erik before had been reassigned. The new guards were older, harder, men who'd earned Halvard's trust through decades of unquestioning obedience. They stood outside the storage shed like carved stone, impervious to bribes or appeals. Astrid had tried twice to get near them and been turned away both times with cold efficiency. She was cutting vegetables for tomorrow's feast when Sasa appeared at her elbow, silent as a ghost. The girl had a talent for moving unnoticed, for being overlooked. Useful skills for a thrall, Astrid thought bitterly. The invisible survived longer. "I have it," Sasa whispered, her eyes fixed on the turnip Astrid was butchering. Both doses, hidden in the hay pile. Behind the pig shelter. Small clay jar marked with an X. Astrid's knife slipped, nearly taking off her thumb. She pressed the blade hard against the cutting board to stop her hand from shaking. "I haven't decided. 2 days left to decide. After that, the choice gets made for you." Sasa's voice was matter of fact, no judgment in it. Just reality, spoken plainly. "The guards change at midnight. There's a window, maybe 1/4 of an hour, where the eastern approach to the shed is unwatched. If you wanted to reach Erik one last time, that would be when." "You've been watching." It wasn't a question. "I've been planning." Sasa finally looked up from the vegetables, her young face ancient with understanding. Someone should get to choose something in all this, even if the choice is just how you leave. Astrid set down the knife before she did cut herself. Her hands were trembling too badly to be trusted with sharp objects. If I do this, if I take that jar to Eric, Halvard will know. You helped? He'll kill you too. Maybe. Sasa shrugged, the gesture carrying a fatalism that made Astrid's chest ache. Or maybe he'll be too focused on explaining how his prisoners died before he could execute them. Too busy controlling that narrative to worry about one more thrall. Either way, I've made peace with it. How? The word came out raw, almost desperate. How do you make peace with any of this? Sasa was quiet for a long moment, her bandaged fingers plucking at her threadbare dress. When I was on that merchant ship traveling here, I prayed to every god I knew. Odin, Thor, Freya, even the Christian god the traders whispered about. I begged them to kill me, to sink the ship, to bring some merciful end before I reached whatever new horror was waiting. She laughed softly, bitterly. But we made it to shore. The merchant sold us, and I knelt in that clearing 3 days ago, absolutely certain I was about to die. But Eric saved you. Eric gave me something more. Valuable than my life. He gave me proof that mercy still exists, that not everyone is Halvard. Sasa met Astrid's eyes directly. You did that. Your existence made Eric into someone who could refuse. So if helping you now gets me killed, at least I'll die having returned the gift. Astrid's vision blurred. She blinked hard, refusing to cry in the kitchen where anyone might see. I don't know if I'm brave enough to drink poison. Bravery is facing the thing that terrifies you. Execution terrifies you. Poison terrifies you. Either way, you have to be brave. Sasa reached out and squeezed Astrid's shoulder briefly. But at least with poison, you're brave on your own terms. She drifted away after that, back to whatever tasks kept her hands busy and her mind occupied. Astrid stood alone at the cutting board, staring at half-chopped vegetables, her mind a howling storm of fear and indecision. 3 days had seemed like time enough to think, to plan, to find some third option that didn't end in death. But 3 days evaporated like morning mist, and she was no closer to clarity. That night, Astrid lay awake again, counting hours. At midnight, she rose silently from her pallet and dressed in the darkness. The other thralls slept on, undisturbed. She slipped outside into air so cold it burned her lungs, the stars sharp as ice shards overhead. The pig shelter smelled exactly as awful as expected. She found the hay pile, dug through it with shaking hands, and pulled out a small clay jar marked with a crude X. It was lighter than she'd expected, barely the weight of 2 cups of water. Such a small thing to hold 2 deaths inside it. She tucked it into her dress and moved through shadows toward the storage shed, following the route Sasa had described. The eastern approach was indeed unwatched, though she could hear guards talking quietly on the other side of the building. Her window was narrow, her opportunity measured in stolen minutes. The shed door wasn't locked from the outside. There was no need when Eric was chained inside. Astrid eased it open just wide enough to slip through, then pulled it closed behind her. The darkness was absolute. She stood still, letting her eyes adjust, her heart hammering so hard she felt dizzy. Astrid? Eric's voice came from the darkness, hoarse with disbelief. How did you? Doesn't matter. She crossed the space by memory, knelt where she'd knelt before, found his face with her hands. I don't have long. Listen. To me. She told him everything. About Sasa, about the hemlock, about the choice that wasn't really a choice, but felt like the only power left to them. She felt his face change under her fingers as she spoke, felt the moment he understood what she was proposing. No. The word came out sharp, immediate. Absolutely not. Eric, I refused to kill that girl so I wouldn't have to kill you. And now you want us to kill ourselves? His chains rattled violently as he tried to reach for her. That's not the same as being saved. That's just Halvard winning differently. Halvard wins either way. Astrid's voice cracked. At least this way he doesn't get to use you as the weapon. At least we go together on our terms, without giving him his spectacle. There has to be another way. An escape, a bargain, something. There's nothing. The words tore out of her. I've looked at every angle, Eric. There's no ship we can steal, no place we can hide, no allies who will risk Halvard's wrath to help. Us. We're trapped. And in 2 days they'll drag me to that clearing and you'll either have to watch me die or they'll force you to do it yourself. Is that better? Is that the ending you want? Eric's breathing was ragged in the darkness. She felt him struggling, felt the war happening inside him between hope and reality, between the future he'd wanted and the one they actually faced. If we drink it, he said slowly, carefully, we have to be together. I won't let you die alone. The guards. Damn the guards. His voice turned hard. If this is happening, it happens with us together. You find a way to get me out of here, or we find a way to die in here. But I won't be chained up while you're somewhere else fading away. That's not negotiable. Astrid pressed her forehead to his, breathing him in, memorizing this moment because there were so few left. Sasa said the guards change at midnight. If something were to distract them, if there was chaos in the compound, a fire. Eric's mind was already working through possibilities. The hay storage near the longhouse. It would draw everyone, including these guards. And in the confusion, you could be freed. We could run for the cliffs past the western fields. No one would find us until morning. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. We could watch the sun rise one more time, together, then drink it and fall asleep watching the light. The image hit Astrid with devastating clarity. The two of them on the cliffs, overlooking the fjord, the sun painting the ice gold and pink, their fingers interlaced as consciousness faded. Not in a shed or a cell or an execution ground, but somewhere beautiful, somewhere that belonged to them. 2 days, she whispered. Tomorrow night during the feast. Everyone will be drunk, distracted. That's when we do it. Eric's chains clinked as he shifted closer. One more day, Astrid. Then we choose our ending. Guards' voices rose outside, closer than before. Astrid's time was gone. She pressed her lips to Eric's once, hard and desperate, tasting salt and goodbye. Then she fled back into the night, the clay jar heavy against her chest, the plan crystallizing into terrible, necessary certainty. 2 days, 48 hours, 2,880 minutes, and at the end of them, fire and freedom and hemlock and sunrise. Not the ending they'd dreamed of, but the only one left that belonged to them. 1 day, the final count. Astrid woke before dawn with the clay jar pressed against her ribs where she'd hidden it in her dress, the weight of it constant as a heartbeat. Around her, the thrall quarters stirred to life, bodies rising for another day of labor that felt surreal in its ordinariness. How could the world continue its routine when everything was ending? The feast preparations consumed the morning. Astrid's hands moved through familiar tasks, kneading bread, plucking chickens, chopping vegetables, while her mind rehearsed the plan over and over, until it became a prayer. Tonight, during the feast, fire in the hay storage, Eric freed in the chaos, run to the cliffs, sunrise, hemlock, together. She kept waiting to feel something about it, terror or peace or resignation. But there was only numbness, a strange floating sensation like she'd already separated from her body and was watching herself from a distance. Maybe this was how people faced death, not with drama or revelation, but with a kind of exhausted acceptance. Sasa found her, mid-morning, carrying linens to be washed. They worked side by side in silence for a while, hands red from cold water, breath fogging in the freezing air. Finally, Sasa spoke without looking up from her scrubbing. Tonight then? Tonight. Astrid's voice was steady. She'd expected it to shake, but it didn't. Thank you. For everything. Don't thank me yet. Sasa's jaw was tight. Fire draws attention, but also suspicion. Someone will figure out it was set deliberately. They'll look for who had reason. By then, it won't matter. It'll matter to me. I'll still be here. Sasa finally met Astrid's eyes, and the fear there was naked and real. Promise me something. When you're on those cliffs, when you're drinking that hemlock, remember that some of us have to keep living. Remember it wasn't for nothing. Astrid's throat closed. She nodded because speaking was impossible. Sasa squeezed her hand once, briefly, then returned to her washing. They didn't speak again for the rest of the morning. The afternoon brought the final preparations. The great hall was decorated with pine boughs and seal oil lamps, the tables laden with food that represented weeks of labor: roasted boar, smoked fish, bread still warm from the ovens, winter vegetables preserved in salt and vinegar. Halvard wanted abundance, wanted everyone to see his wealth and power on full display. Astrid served and smiled and moved like a ghost through the gathering crowd. Warriors arrived from allied settlements. Eager for free food and entertainment, women wore their finest brooches and combs. Children ran underfoot, excited by the unusual energy. And through it all, Halvard held court like a king, his voice booming with laughter and authority, never once looking at Astrid, but somehow always aware of exactly where she stood. The message was clear. Tomorrow, she would die. But tonight, life continued. Power continued. His rule continued regardless of sentiment or sacrifice. He'd already moved past them, already written the saga where their deaths were mere footnotes in his rise. As the sun set and the feast began in earnest, Astrid caught glimpses of Sasa moving through the shadows near the hay storage. Small movements, careful preparations. The girl had volunteered to help with this final act, understanding that speed would be essential. Get the fire burning hot and fast, then disappear into the chaos. Mead flowed freely. Warriors boasted about battles and raids. Women gossiped about the upcoming marriage alliance. The volume in the hall rose as inhibitions fell, the household settling into the particular rhythm of a celebration that would last deep into the night. No one was watching the thralls closely. No one ever really watched thralls. Astrid served Halvard directly at one point, pouring mead into his cup while he discussed trade routes with a visiting jarl. His eyes slid over her like she was furniture, already forgotten. She was nothing to him, had always been nothing, except a tool to break his brother, and soon she wouldn't even be that. The dismissiveness should have hurt. Instead, it felt almost liberating. His opinion didn't matter anymore. Nothing he thought about her mattered. She set down the pitcher and stepped back, her hand brushing the clay jar hidden in her dress. Tonight, she would take back the only thing that was truly hers: her death, her choice, her ending. The feast reached its crescendo as full darkness fell. Warriors were drunk now, singing songs about glory and conquest. Halvard stood to make a speech about his father's legacy and his own future. Astrid slipped toward the kitchen, her absence unnoticed in the chaos. Sasa met her by the door, her face pale but determined. "Ready?" Sasa whispered. Astrid nodded. They moved together through the darkness toward the hay storage, keeping to shadows, their hearts hammering in sync. The storage building loomed before them, packed with winter feed for the animals, dry and perfect. For burning, Sasa had already positioned kindling and oil-soaked rags. All they needed was flame. "When it catches, run back to the hall," Astrid instructed quietly. "Scream about the fire. Make sure everyone sees you were inside when it started." Sasa struck the flint, sparks jumping onto the oil-soaked material. The fire caught immediately, hungry and bright. For a moment, both women stood transfixed by the flames, watching them spread with horrifying speed. Then Sasa grabbed Astrid's arm. "Go! Now! Get him and run!" Astrid ran. Behind her, she heard Sasa's voice rising in alarm, heard the sudden commotion as people noticed the fire, heard the chaos beginning. She flew across the compound toward the storage shed, her lungs burning, the clay jar bouncing against her ribs. The guards were already moving toward the fire, shouting questions, trying to understand what was happening. The door to the shed stood unguarded for precious seconds. Astrid burst through it, fumbling in the eye. Darkness for Eric's chains. Fire? Eric's voice was tight with understanding. Fire. Astrid's fingers found the lock on his chains. No key. She hadn't thought about the key. Panic rose in her throat like bile. The ring. Eric's chains rattled as he showed her. "The iron ring in the foundation. If we can break it loose." They had seconds, maybe a minute before someone realized prisoners shouldn't be left unguarded even during emergencies. Astrid grabbed a heavy wooden beam leaning against the wall and wedged it under the iron ring. Erik pulled with his full weight while she levered, both of them straining, sweat and desperation making their hands slip. The ring groaned, held. They tried again, throwing everything they had against ancient iron and stone. Outside, the shouting was getting closer. Someone would check on Erik any moment now. The ring tore free with a crack like breaking bone. Erik stumbled backward, chains still attached to his wrists but no longer anchored. He grabbed Astrid's hand and they burst out of the shed together, running for the western edge of the compound while behind them orange flames reached toward the black sky, and the household descended into magnificent chaos. They ran through darkness, stumbling over frozen ground, Erik's chains clanking with every step. No pursuit yet. Maybe no one had noticed their absence in the confusion. Maybe they'd have the time they needed. The western fields opened before them, and beyond them, the cliffs. Overlooking the fjord, they could see the water far below, black and silver in the starlight, waves breaking against rocks in eternal rhythm. The wind here was brutal, tearing at their clothes, burning their faces with cold. But it was also beautiful. Impossibly, devastatingly beautiful. They collapsed together at the cliff's edge, gasping for breath, Erik still wearing his chains like grotesque jewelry. The compound behind them glowed with firelight, small figures running like ants trying to save what they could. From this distance, it looked almost peaceful, a contained disaster that had nothing to do with them anymore. "We made it," Erik said, wonder in his voice. "We actually made it." Astrid pulled out the clay jar with shaking hands. Dawn was still hours away. They had time. Time to sit together on this cliff and watch stars wheel overhead. Time to say everything that needed saying. Time to memorize each other's faces one last time before the hemlock did its work. Erik's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close against the cold. She leaned into him, the jar held between them, their future reduced to this single container and the choice it represented. "When the sun rises," Astrid whispered, "we'll drink it together. Watch the light come up over the water, then sleep. Together," Erik confirmed. "I love you. Whatever happens next, whatever waits beyond this, I love you. I love you too." The words were inadequate for what she felt, but they were all language offered. "I love you, and this is enough. This moment, this choice, us." They sat like that as the night deepened around them. Two figures at the edge of the world, waiting for sunrise and endings, and the peace that comes with finally choosing your own fate. One last night, one last dawn, then rest. The stars faded one by one as dawn approached, the sky bleeding from black to deep blue to pale gray. Astrid and Erik sat pressed together at the cliff's edge, watching the transformation. The clay jar resting in Astrid's lap like a sleeping animal. They'd talked through the night, words spilling out in desperate torrents, memories of stolen moments, confessions of fear, promises about what they hoped waited beyond death. Now, as light crept across the horizon, they'd fallen into silence. The first rays of sun broke over the distant peaks, painting the fjord in shades of gold and rose. Ice glittered on the rocks below like scattered jewels. The wind had died to almost nothing, leaving the morning preternaturally still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. "It's beautiful," Astrid whispered, her voice rough from talking all night. "I'd forgotten how beautiful it could be." Erik's fingers tightened around hers. "I'm glad we get to see this. One more sunrise, together." Astrid picked up the jar with her free hand, testing its weight one final time. Inside, the hemlock waited, Sasa's careful preparation that would bring sleep and then silence. No pain, she'd promised. Just peace. Astrid uncorked it, and the smell that rose was bitter and green, like crushed leaves and endings. "Half for each of us," Erik said quietly. "We drink at the same time. Fall asleep watching the light." Astrid nodded and poured half the contents into Erik's cupped palm. He raised it, and she lifted the jar. Their eyes met and held. This was it, the final choice, the last moment of consciousness before everything changed. "I love you," Astrid said. "I love you," Erik answered. They brought the poison to their lips. Astrid felt the liquid touch her mouth, tasted the bitterness on her tongue. One swallow, and it would be over. One choice, and they'd cheat Halvard out of his spectacle, reclaim their deaths from his control, leave the world on their own terms, wrapped in each other's arms. She prepared to swallow. "Wait!" The voice cracked across the morning like a whip. Astrid's head snapped up, the jar frozen at her lips. A figure was running toward them across the western fields, moving with desperate speed, arms waving frantically. Sasa! It was Sasa, her dress torn, her face wild with something between terror and hope. "Don't drink it!" Sasa screamed as she got closer. "Please, please don't drink it yet." Erik lowered his hand slowly, the hemlock pooling in his palm. "What?" Sasa reached them, gasping, her words tumbling over each other. "A ship. There's a ship in the harbor. It came in an hour ago while they were fighting the fire. Christian. Missionaries from the south heading for the western settlements." She grabbed Astrid's arm, her fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "They're taking thralls, buying them, freeing them." Astrid's mind struggled to process the words. "What?" "The Christians don't believe in slavery. They buy thralls and free them, take them to their settlements where they can work as free people." Sasa's eyes were bright with tears and exhaustion. "I heard the captain talking to one of Halvard's men. They're leaving with the morning tide. That's now. That's right now." Erik stood slowly, the poison still cupped in his hand, chains dragging behind him. "Halvard would never sell us. Not after everything. Halvard doesn't know you're gone yet. He thinks you're still locked up, thinks Astrid's still in the compound. The fire destroyed the hay storage and part of the longhouse. Everything is chaos." Sasa was crying now, her words coming through sobs. "If you can get to that ship, if you can, convince them to take you, you could leave. Actually leave. Actually live." Astrid's hand trembled so badly the jar nearly slipped from her grip. Hope was more painful than despair, more dangerous than poison. Hope could kill you just as surely as hemlock, but slower, more cruelly. Even if they took us, Halvard would pursue. He'd never let this stand. The captain said they sail to lands beyond where Norse jarls have power, Christian kingdoms where Halvard's authority means nothing. Sasa grabbed the jar from Astrid's hands. "You were going to die anyway. If this doesn't work, you can still drink this, but you have to try. You have to at least try to live." Erik looked at Astrid, the question clear in his eyes. The sun was climbing higher now, the morning advancing, the tide preparing to turn. Minutes, they had minutes to decide. Drink the poison and find peace, or run for that ship and maybe, impossibly, find freedom. "How do we get to the harbor without being seen?" Erik asked. And Astrid's heart lurched because he was considering it, because he wanted to try. The eastern path, it's exposed but everyone's focused on the fire damage. Sasa pulled a knife from her belt and started working on Erik's chains. The locks were beyond her skill, but she could muffle the sound with torn cloth, make them less obvious. "You'd have to run, and you'd have to convince the captain to take you before Halvard realizes you're gone." Astrid looked at the jar in Sasa's hands, then at the sun climbing over the fjord, then at Erik standing beside her with hope and terror warring in his face. 8 days ago, she'd been kneading bread with flour in her hair, and Erik had been training in the yard, and neither of them knew their world was about to end. Now they stood at a cliff's edge holding poison, and someone was offering them a ship. "We run," Astrid said, her voice stronger than she felt. "We try. If it doesn't work, we come back here." Erik threw the hemlock from his palm, watching it splash against rocks. "But we try to live first." Sasa grabbed both their hands. "The ship has a blue sail. Captain is called Magnus. Tell him Sasa sent you. Tell him you're thralls seeking freedom. He's a good man. He'll listen." She pressed the jar back into Astrid's hands. Take this anyway, just in case. But please, please make it to that ship. They ran. Across frozen fields, along the eastern path, Eric's chains rattling despite Sassa's muffling, both of them gasping for breath in the cold morning air. The compound behind them was still consumed with fire damage, smoke rising black against the pale sky. No alarm had been raised yet. No pursuit. The harbor appeared below them, and there, the ship with blue sails, Christians making final preparations to catch the tide. Astrid could see figures moving on deck, could see supplies being loaded, could see the gangplank still down. They slid and stumbled down the rocky path to the harbor, emerging onto the dock just as a broad man with a silver cross around his neck was preparing to pull up the plank. He stopped when he saw them, his eyes taking in Eric's chains, Astrid's thrall clothing, their desperate faces. "Magnus," Eric gasped out. "Captain Magnus?" The man nodded slowly, his hand moving to rest on the knife at his belt. "Sassa sent us. We're thralls. Escaping. We need—" Astrid's words tumbled over each other. "Please, we need passage. Anywhere you're going, we can work. We can—" "Thralls don't escape," Magnus said carefully. "Someone will come looking for you. Let them look." Eric straightened, despite his exhaustion. "We're willing to take that risk, are you?" Magnus studied them for a long moment. Behind them, Astrid heard shouts rising from the compound. Someone had discovered they were missing. Time was collapsing into seconds. "I don't believe in keeping people in chains," Magnus said finally. "Get on board. We sail now." They scrambled up the gangplank, Eric's. Chains clanking against wood. Sailors stared but moved to follow orders as Magnus shouted commands. The plank came up. Ropes were cast off. The blue sail caught wind. Astrid gripped the ship's railing as they pulled away from the dock, watching the harbor recede. Figures were running down the path now, Halvard's warriors arriving too late, their shouts carrying across the water but unable to stop the ship's momentum. She saw Halvard himself appear at the water's edge, his face twisted with rage. His arm raised as if he could command the ship to return through sheer force of will. But the wind was strong and favorable, and the ship moved steadily away from land, away from his authority, away from the death sentence that had counted down to this impossible morning. Eric's arm came around her waist, pulling her close. They stood together at the rail, watching Norway shrink behind them, the compound where they'd been slaves becoming small, and then smaller, and then just a smudge of smoke. Against distant cliffs. "We made it," Eric whispered, disbelief thick in his voice. "We actually made it." Astrid pulled the clay jar from her dress and held it up to the light. The hemlock inside caught the sun, turning golden and deceptively beautiful. She uncorked it and poured the contents into the sea, watching the poison dissipate into waves that would carry it away to nothing. "We chose to live," she said quietly. "We chose to try." The ship sailed west toward lands they'd never seen, toward a future they'd been certain they'd never have. Behind them, the sun climbed higher over the fjord, painting everything in shades of new beginnings. They'd lost everything they'd ever known. They were sailing toward uncertainty with nothing but each other and the clothes they wore. But they were breathing. They were free. They were together. And for the first time in 8 days, Astrid felt something other than fear. She felt hope. Fragile and terrifying and absolutely real. The countdown had ended not in death, but in sunrise and salt spray and the impossible gift of tomorrow. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do isn't fighting against impossible odds. It's choosing to keep hoping when hope seems like the cruelest option of all. Eric and Astrid stood at the edge of death with poison in their hands, ready to take back the only power they had left. But in that final moment, they chose something harder than surrender. They chose to believe that maybe, just maybe, the world still had room for mercy. What would you have done? Would you have drunk the hemlock and found peace? Or would you have run for that ship, risking everything for a future that might never come? Their story reminds us that love isn't just about the grand gestures or the perfect moments. It's about seeing someone when the rest of the world looks right through them, It's about refusing to become the person cruelty demands you to be, even when refusal costs you everything. Eric could have chosen power and legitimacy. Astrid could have accepted her fate quietly. Instead, they chose each other, and that choice, that impossible, terrifying choice, became their salvation. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something real, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that will break your heart and put it back together again. Because sometimes we all need to be reminded that even in the darkest moments, even when the countdown reaches 0, there's still a chance for sunrise. Thank you for listening.